I eventually moved back in with my mother after I told her I had stopped dealing drugs. And when she found out that I hadn't stopped, she said, hey, get out my house. That took me down to Tucson, where I had one of my brothers stay with his father. So I go down to Tucson, and where she kind of thought that it would get me out of the drug environment, she put me down in Tucson, and everything was fine. To about 3 months later, I was reintroduced to the drug culture, but this time I was introduced to, big time dealers. So I actually went from bad to worse. So I'm down there. I go into Mexico a couple times. And this was something that just blew my mind. I didn't know or never experienced any of this. I didn't know how to deal with being introduced to a higher level of drug dealing. So I was told that I didn't have to sell anything, just broker deals. And that's what I did, just broker deals. So me brokering a deal, I would make anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 a day brokering these deals, really just making an hour phone call, making sure the parties had a place to meet, and then kind of just clean up and lock up and go on about life. So I would make, one deal a day, and I was cool. I mean, I was 18. As quick as the money came in, I was at the arcade or, doing whatever a young male does to spend all the money that he just made all day. I look back now at my level of maturity, and I didn't understand the dangers that I was in until one day I put two parties together, and one guy decides to rob the other. So the day this happened, individuals came in, and, I set the parties up and I go on. And when I get back, they're putting the individual in the trunk of his car. And the gun gets pointed at me and tell me I better not say anything. So at that point, it's probably about 3:00-ish. And there's kids, there's people out there. They get in the car and they drive off. So I go in, I look around, and I leave, wondering what just happened. I mean, I knew what happened, but I'm looking at myself like, what just happened? So now my associates' friends are calling me, and they're saying, hey, what happened? We haven't heard anything. And I'm like, I don't know. And I don't have answers. But then I call myself trying to hunt down the individuals who committed this crime. And that took me from that point all the way to probably 8 months to try to hunt these individuals down. And all the time I'm trying to hunt them down, the police are hunting me, because they were told that I was actually the one who committed this crime. My name was given up to them. They were looking for me, and they eventually caught up with me. So here it is, about 8 months after the crime occurred. They tracked down where my mother stays, and they're about to kick in her door. And she just happens, she sees all the police pulling up. And she, my niece and them were playing outside. So she opens the door to tell my niece and them to come inside, not knowing that the police were actually coming to her house. I wasn't there at the time, but I think the most embarrassing part of my life was when, she said one of the detectives told her that, hey, we're looking for your son. He killed somebody. And that was probably one of the most embarrassing parts of my life because, this is not something that I would want to ever bring home to put on my mother's doorstep. So one of the detectives took my brother and arrested him. And we kind of look alike. I'm a little bit heavier, but he ended up being arrested. And then they told my mom, well, you let me know that he will not be released. My brother won't be released until I turn myself in. And I didn't know this. I was a kid thinking I knew everything. So when I got the message, when I called later and found out about everything and I got the message, I called this detective and I told him I wanted to turn myself in. I had talked to a few people, and me trying to hunt down the individuals who were involved in this, I was told that, hey, even if you found the individuals, what are you going to do? Are you going to hurt them? And now you have, you've committed that crime, or are you going to turn them over to the police, handcuff them and turn them over, or what? And I think all the fear, the anxiety, everything that had boiled up, it dawned on me like, wait a minute, what I'm doing is not making any sense. So I turned myself in. So I turned myself in at a Circle K in California, Moreno Valley, California. And the officer pulls up, pats me down. He says, I had every intentions on coming here to arrest you, but, some of the things that we've been finding out over this last couple days, we need to talk to you because some things are not adding up. I asked about my brother, and he said, we took your brother back home an hour after we arrested him. But he said, we need to go somewhere and sort some things out. So instead of driving back to the police station, we go into a parking lot, Stater Brothers parking lot, shopping center. And, he was just saying the evidence that we have and what we're hearing on the streets is not adding up. We need to sort some things out. And he said, I don't think you did this. However, if you're not willing to let me know what went on, we don't have a problem sending you to prison for what somebody else did. So in that parking lot, that's the first time I told them I didn't have anything to do with it. And I let them know exactly what happened. Okay. From that point, they treated me as a witness. I was a witness to what occurred. They take me back to the police station. And prior to going to the police station, he says, well, we need to get this on tape because we have to present it to the prosecutors, and we got to figure out how to keep you involved without you getting in any trouble. He said, I need a few things from you. I need you to turn over any guns that you had. I need you to pass polygraph. and then I need you to stay in contact with me. So we go back into the police station. He turns his recorder on, reads me my rights, turns the recorder off, and he says, well, just tell me everything that you told me in the parking lot. And then after that, you can go home. He made other promises. Hey, you won't be in any trouble, X, Y, and Z. The list goes on. And he turns the recorder back on. So after that, I go home. It's probably about a month later. I go down to Yuma, take a polygraph, turn my weapon over. They actually purchased my weapon from another individual, and took it, ran ballistics on it. It was not the weapon, which I knew it wasn't. Passed the polygraph. I did everything they asked me to exclude myself as the person who committed this crime. Probably about 4 months after that, they catch the alleged shooter. And they say, hey, well, we need you to come to trial, or come to the preliminary hearing and testify as to what happened. So I come to the preliminary hearing. So between them catching the individual and him going to preliminary hearing, I'm getting threats to my text, my pager back then, not text, but pager. And 187 is the code in California. So I let the prosecutors know, hey, let the detectives know, I'm getting these threats. And they refuse to do anything. So I stopped cooperating. I refused to go to trial and testify. And I got up and I went to Ohio. I go to Dayton, Ohio. Alleged shooter goes to trial, gets acquitted. After he gets acquitted, everything that I seen as a witness gets transferred into a confession. So since he was acquitted, not only do they take my statement and turn it into a confession, but they turn around and they build a case on me. And when I say built a case, I'm saying they've created a case to convict me for murder that they know I didn't commit. This goes on. I get extradited back from Ohio. I go to trial. This was 1996. I go to trial March of 97. Opening statements to closing statement was one day. My defense attorney did not even present a defense on my behalf. And I go in front of the judge and she says her hands was tied. Her hands were tied. She had no choice but to sentence me to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. And I asked her, I said, how could that be? I wasn't there, didn't have anything to do with this. And the judge said right back to me, even though you didn't have anything to do with this, you was not there, didn't seem to know what was going to happen, I have to convict you, or you're convicted, I have to sentence you to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years.
You had a jury trial?
Yes, after a jury trial. So at that point, I go to prison. I walk into prison, and you hear so many stories about prison. You hear so many bad things about prison. And I was 22 when I walked into prison. And I just remember getting off the bus in Florence, walking through these big walls, 20-foot walls. And I kept wondering why everybody was calling this prison the walls, the walls. And it's surrounded by 20-foot walls. And you see these guards walking the wall with guns. And I just remember, like, this is not going to be good. You know, I'm going to have to fight every day. You know, I don't know anybody in the prison. And I remember getting off the bus and walking through the yard, and everybody stops when the new people hit the yard, and they're looking. And then I remember going up to my cell and just thinking, like, what happened? What happened? I think that first week I didn't even eat. And then I get there. I end up running to a few people that I knew from the streets. And they were like, what are you doing here? And I told them what I was convicted of. And they was like, that's messed up. And they said, who was your prosecutor? And I told them who my prosecutor was. And they was like, no, that guy's not right. And I was like, what are you talking about? They was like, no, that guy's not right. Come over to the law library. And this is when we had law libraries in the prison. So I go into the law library, get inside the law library, and get to talking to some of the people, you know, legal beagles or you know, the yard lawyers about my case and what happened. And they were like, you got messed over. I told them prosecutor's name. And they just started pointing out guys across the law library. Hey, yeah, he had him too. He had him too. He had him too. And one of the key things to my conviction was they brought somebody in, an ex-girlfriend who they had threatened to get on the stand. They threatened something, taking her kids away if she didn't testify against me. And she got on the stand, and, you know, all of a sudden, I told her that I committed the murder. Yes. So that was one of the things I was convicted of, part of her testimony, that I told her I committed this murder, which they had all the evidence already that exonerated me. And then when they asked her what was my motive, it was a robbery. I took the guy's car, took his rims, the whole nine. When the car was found, they found the rims on the car. So everything she was testifying to, they had the evidence to prove contrary. So these guys were in the law libraries and they were telling me, hey, yeah, you can see the pattern. And I was like, well, what do I do? And they were, hey, first off, don't go out there, play basketball. You come in here, come into the law library. So I just remember consistently coming into that law library, and that was my first experience with learning law. I think it was probably a year later, we heard rumors of them taking the law libraries away because, you know, so many people were going back getting their cases overturned because they didn't have good representation. And at that point, we were told, hey, take the books, take your cases, photocopy them because you're going to need them. Then the law libraries go away. I had one good attorney at that time, my direct appeal, Carla Ryan. She preserved as much as she could. Then I get moved to a 4-yard because I started in prison as a 5-2, which is like your maximum yard. So your five score is your public risk, And then your back score is your institutional risk. So each couple years you get reclassed and they'll bring you down lower in the custody. So at this point, I'm going into a 4-yard. So I get transferred to Yuma. Go to Yuma. I get a Rule 32, which is a post-conviction relief attorney appointed to me. This post-conviction relief attorney goes in, no representation, no effort, no anything. Matter of fact, when she got off my case, she didn't even notify me. She just left my case. So I get a letter from the courts advising me that I'm out of time frames to file my next appeal. So I panicked. I did the only thing I knew how to do. Until today, I have copies, which I should have brought today, but I call them my lifelong love letters, because in my best penmanship, I remember writing this judge what I called a motion at the time, but it looked like a love letter. And I bring that up because those love letters asking the judge to reconsider her earlier decisions of denying my appeal eventually saved my life later on, and I'll get to that. So we go on. I have no attorney now, and I'm trying to struggle with representing myself on an appeal, which is extremely hard. So one day I'm at the child hall and we're talking about the same prosecutor. His name is Ken Peasley. We're talking about this prosecutor. And now I'm in another yard, and several individuals is talking about the same prosecutor. So one day, guy named Bobby comes up and he gives me this address, and he said, "You should write this organization. They've been fighting against that prosecutor." And I look, paper says Arizona Justice Project. And I was like, because at that point, I really didn't trust any more attorneys. So I remember putting the number on the shelf, the address on the shelf, and it took me about 30 days before I would finally, swallow my pride and said, "Hey, let me write these people." And that's where my life started to change. So I did bring something with me today, because I had written several letters asking people to represent me, asking people to look into the issue of why I was in prison. Till today, I only got one response, and that was from the Arizona Justice Project. A second-year law student by the name of Amy Armstrong responded in 2001, and she wrote me. And I share this because she says, "Mr. Rushdown, I am writing you to introduce myself to you. My name is Amy Armstrong, and I am volunteering with the Justice Project and will be working on your case. I'm a second-year law student, and I plan on doing criminal defense work when I graduate. The students involved with the Arizona Justice Project assist the attorneys with research, organization, etc., so that they are better and more efficient to serve the client. We also have an opportunity to gain some concrete knowledge about law and the appellate process. I've been reviewing your file, Mr. Rushdown, and I have to tell you that I am sickened and disheartened with your prosecution and sentence. I want you to know that everything that Mr. Kirkendall, Mike, he was the other student on my case, and I do, regarding your case, will be zealous and comprehensive efforts to remedy this injustice. I have worked for Mr. Kirkendall before, and he is an incredible advocate. We are fortunate to have him on your case, and I hope you are well, and I look forward to speaking with you sometime soon. And the first thing I did after getting this letter, I looked at the envelope and I said, wait a minute. I said, I know she said second-year law student because she was talking like she was an attorney. And for anybody that knows Amy Armstrong, she was a second-year law student, but she was an attorney. And she represented me for 10 years. She represented me for 10 years. And she never gave up, even in the face of adversity, where it's not really popular to undo a conviction, where in the appeals, they really look to uphold the conviction. And that's what was happening. And Amy believed in me, and she said, this is not right. So the first part of her belief is she listened when I was telling her. As I told the other attorneys, wait a minute, we went to a parking lot where the officer told me, he told me not to worry about waiving my rights when he turns on that recorder. And I told a trial attorney, and he failed to investigate that. And the officers went in and they lied. And they told the judge, no, he clearly waived his rights. And it was upheld several times. Not too long after right before my trial, I noticed, but mainly after my trial, I noticed 2 sets of transcripts. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, why is there 2 sets of transcripts? But this one over here is 6 pages longer than this one. And it was meant for me to find this because I didn't notice it. I don't think they knew it, the detectives. But what happened that day when we were in the police department, when he turned his recorder off and he made all these reassurances and for me to just tell my story over again. And then he turns in the recorder to make it seem like, it was just me coming in there and confessing. See, he didn't know that Moreno Valley Police Department was also recording everything. And they didn't turn their recorder off. They kept their recorder going. So all the things he thought he was saying off the record, he was really on their record. And I had those transcripts. So we introduced that. We also hired a private investigator, found the ex-girlfriend. She was in Texas somewhere. He was able to interview her. And she came clean and she said, hey, me and her had never talked about this situation. She told the investigator that she was threatened by this prosecutor to come in and lie. And they actually gave her a script to follow. But the biggest part of all of this came when the prosecutor himself said the only reason he prosecuted me was because he felt I let the real killer go. So prior to that happening, we exhaust all our remedies in state court. We go into federal court and we get granted an evidentiary hearing. So now I can go back and I can present this to a federal judge on a habeas corpus, which I'm saying, hey, I'm being held illegally. So we get the evidentiary hearing, and about that, a little bit before that evidentiary hearing, I get some real bad news. The bad news came in the form, everybody has a messy sister. And, the family had decided to not tell me that my mom was diagnosed with cancer because they didn't want me worrying about that while I was incarcerated. And, that messy sister, she decided to write me a letter and tell me everything that they didn't want me to know. And, I just remember being crushed. All the things that I took for granted, the time I took for granted, I'm sitting here and like, wow. Me and my mom, we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and I had separated myself, so we wasn't really talking. And now I'm in prison, and she's diagnosed with cancer, and she's already probably like 67 years old or something like that. So the sense of urgency came to where instead of me going back to the evidentiary hearing, I told my attorney, I said, look, just ask them to give me time served. I don't even care. Give me something, time served. I will sign it now because I need to get home. If my mom passes, I will not see her again. So the state agreed. So I was supposed to go back to court and sign for solicitation of drugs or whatever and just get time served and be released. So about December of 2009, I go back to court. I leave the yard, go back to court, get down there. We have two hearings. First hearing, it's a status hearing because now the Superior Court judge has to get jurisdiction to resentence me. Jurisdiction never came or was never established because prosecutor goes off the record. Not the prosecutor who tried me, but the prosecutor who was representing the state at this hearing. He goes off the record and he says, Your Honor, you don't expect the state to fall on their own sword because the judge would not accept jurisdiction unless they accepted the responsibility of prosecutorial misconduct and vindictiveness. They were trying to push it off on ineffective assistance of counsel, and the judge is like, no, I'm not going to accept that. I will accept what the federal judge found, the vindictive prosecution and the misconduct. So anyway, we have another hearing, state backs out of their plea. So now I'm down there. We just lifted the stay. I go into the evidentiary hearing. I guess everything was supposed to happen for a reason because today I'm not supposed to be here. And we have this evidentiary hearing. The prosecutor who tried me gets on the stand and he admits to everything he did and felt he didn't do anything wrong and stated that if he had an opportunity to do it again, he wouldn't change anything. He would do it all over the same way. The judge found differently and gave her verbal recommendation that my case be overturned. With that being said, she gives the verbal recommendation. Now it has to go to a federal judge to sign off. This is a magistrate judge. It goes up to federal judge to sign off. In that time, I go back to prison about another year and a half. About another year and a half. So when it finally gets to the judge to sign off, he signs off, but then he gives them another 180 days. No, 120 days to refile. So at that point, I'm not an attorney, but I'm saying, wait a minute, that's double jeopardy because it was prosecutorial misconduct. But he gives him 120 days. And I think that was more towards the civil side to protect himself civilly. I don't know, but it doesn't make sense. But I'm just sitting there waiting on the state to decide if they want to retry me for a case that they put together. And get back to the yard. I had so many mixed emotions because I'm thinking about my mother. You know, my whole prison time, there were several times I just wanted to give up because it is a really high burden to prove that you didn't do something after you've been convicted of it. And they say you've gotten, or you went in front of a jury of your peers. It's really hard to prove that. And I talk about being blessed and lucky at the same time because they kind of have to work in favor. So I'm in Lewis prison. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I think it was a Tuesday or something. They say, hey, roll your stuff up. And he said, no, never mind. We need to get you down here because we got to get you fingerprinted. And I'm like, man, because I hadn't heard anything from my attorney. So I'm thinking that they trumped up some more charges. And I'm going back to court. So the officer rushes me down, fingerprints me. So I kept asking him, like, what is this for? He's like, I don't know. We just got a call to get your fingerprints and roll your stuff up. And nobody gets rolled up in the middle of the day. You either leave, well, you always leave about 5 or 6 in the morning. So I'm like, oh boy, unless they delay. So I'm like, I'm going back. So on the way back to the yard, the officer says, hey, the deputy warden wants to talk to you. So I'm like, that's odd. So I'm thinking that they want to bring me up to the admin building and rearrest me there. So we get up to the admin building and I'm sitting there waiting to go in to see the deputy warden. So I get into the deputy warden's office and she says, congratulations, you're going home. Like, what are you talking about? So she said, no, we just got this order to release you immediately. And I'm like, because I would have heard it from my attorney first. So, you know, she sticks her hand out and she says, you know, don't come back. You know, we know your case has been overturned. And she was like, you know, do good. Don't come back in the hole. And I'm just, all of this is just going in one ear and out the other. And, you know, the officer escorts me back to my building. I get back to my building and I'm knocking on my CO3's door because I'm like, look, I need to make an emergency call. So he was like, oh, let's do it. We can do it later. And I said, look, they just told me I'm being released and I need to make an emergency call. So he's like, oh, for real? So, you know, he sets up the call where I can get in contact with my attorney. I call her. And I told her what just transpired. And I hear her typing some keys and she's like, oh my God. She says, you are going home. And she started screaming. I said, for real? This time for real? She said, yeah, you're going home. And at that point, I knew it was real because she wouldn't lie to me. And I remember going back into my run and everybody was waiting in suspense Because, I mean, guys are nosy. They're more nosy and getting to. So everybody's waiting, like, what's up? What's going on? And I couldn't go back down to run because I started choking up at that point. So I remember going into the shower, closing it, and sitting there crying for a couple minutes to get myself together. And then I remember going back and just giving everything away except my photos and paperwork and stuff, and just said it's a possibility. But we never say we're free until we're on the other side of the gate. So the officer was like, hey, you know, we got to get you out of here. We got to get you out of here. And the only thing that rings true till today is when I was talking to my attorney and she filed this motion. It really, I don't want to say there was no legal basis behind it, but she was pleading to the judge, you know, his mom is sick, you know, the holidays, it's coming up, his birthday's coming up. She put all of this in and loaded it into this motion, and she didn't expect this judge to even respond, let alone respond quick. And when I say, you know, blessed and lucky, I walked out of there December 20th, 2011, 2 days before my birthday, December 22nd. And I walked out the yard and, you know, guys were coming up, hugging me from all races. And it was just amazing. But to get on the other side of the fence and then realize that the air breathes different, it put a lot in me. But I still wanted to see my mother. So I get released. At this time, my mom is staying in Las Vegas. Since my sentence wasn't finalized because the state still had roughly like a month, I was kind of released like on the OR, you know, into my sister's custody, and I wasn't supposed to leave her custody. She stayed in Southern California. My mom moved to Las Vegas. But, you know, my biggest struggle was I was able to see my mom 4 times before she passed away, 8 months after my release. So, I still get choked up because I think that's a chapter in my life that, you know, I can never close. You know, and even till today, I struggle with it because for some reason, I think that me not going to prison would have changed her path. So, you know, upon my release, after she passed, I really struggled. I wanted to actually go back to prison, and I don't tell this to a lot of people, but I mean, being honest, you know, I just felt at that point there was really no reason to be out. You know, it's like being in a time machine, traveling 15 years into the future. And then they let you out and say, hey, you know, be happy and live. All the hope we stomped out of you, here, you know, here's your check, your gate fee, you know, go restore your hope. And then to come out and people have stigmas. You're like, you went to prison for what? You know, it's hard. It's hard. With my case being overturned, my record being expunged because it was a wrongful conviction. I have a fingerprint clearance card today. And people still view me as an ex-felon. In some parts, I'm still a pseudo-citizen. stuck in between prison and society. And a lot of times, you know, people open their doors not out of sincerity of their heart to help, but because I got a great story. But, you know, I have to work harder to overcome. Because my mother's last words to me was like, you know, she said, you were always intelligent. Use your knowledge to do something good. And so that's what I've been doing. You know, I went, got a commercial driver's license, started driving trucks. And just wanted to travel. Actually, I was getting paid to travel. One night sleeping in the desert, 2 nights later sleeping on top of a mountain. And it dawned on me that I had created my own prison because I confined myself to certain city blocks. And it's like, wait a minute, you know, I've been in California all this time and never even seen other parts of the state. And to be on that truck, I felt free because it was like my cell on wheels, my single man cell on wheels. And people say, well, how'd you meet your wife if you were running? And I call it running crazy because I wanted to take my mind off of everything that I had lost. And I almost didn't meet her because we actually were introduced by my sister, who was a supervisor for the county of Riverside at the time. And upon my release, she had been telling all her coworkers, you know, my brother's case is looking good. And she's sharing this with her coworkers. And then I get released and she's like, well, now you got to meet everybody. And she takes me to her job and I meet Irene for the first time. And we have an art interest. So we talked about art and kind of connecting. And, you know, my idea was to take my art and her poetry and just kind of put them in the greeting cards. And then we didn't communicate for another 3 years, about 3 years, because I was driving and dealing with life. And then one day, you know, I really wanted to produce some greeting cards. And I was like, wait a minute, what was that lady who's doing the poetry? So I call her and, you know, I end up taking some time because I had set several appointments and chose to take another load instead of stopping to meet up with her to talk about this business. And then, you know, this last time, something just said, hey, do it now. And, you know, we stopped, we met, and where I thought we had nothing in common, you know, we started seeing we had more in common than we realized. And, you know, she eventually asked me what I wanted for my birthday. So I said a wife. So, you know, I mean, I'm a guy's, but the guys was like, how could you get married on your birthday? So this Saturday, December 22nd, is my birthday and our 3rd anniversary. Oh, it is for you.
She knows, Khalil. Okay.
But
you're in so much trouble.
but the realities of that is, you know, I started reevaluating, and you say, you know, everybody, we take time for granted, and we we don't value the partnerships we do have because we're always looking for that, that real good partner instead of really investing in the partner you do have. And, this woman has had my back. I know I'm difficult because my therapy is to get out and try to change the world. I probably work about 120 hours a week. I wear several hats, and I chose to get off the truck and come back to be a case manager with Sage Counseling. That was October 15. So Sage Counseling, they have the contract with Department of Corrections. So I became a direct mentor for those individuals coming out of prison and was able to help guide them and walk them through things. And I wanted to give them those tools that I didn't have through my experience. And then also to share parts of my story. Because our orientations were only about 2 hours. So, it's hard to cram 45 years of your life into the 2 hours, but, I managed. And, a lot of the guys transition, a lot of people transition real good because I was able to identify what they would face prior to them facing it. So I ended up becoming mentor coordinator, and that was all 18 officers statewide, end up traveling the state, meeting other people in communities. And that's when I really just started to have a deeper understanding that reentry looks different in different parts of the state. There is no blanket. You can't just build a mold and cram everybody into it. So, I made some poor decisions because I'm not Tony Starks. I don't have billions of dollars to sit because I call myself a social justice avenger. But with that being said, I was only making $423 a week. And people say, "You were what?" And it's like, yeah. But I looked past the finances because it was therapeutic for me to help people. And that's where I say, my wife had my back. So at the end of last year, I said, well, I got to do something different. I'm going to end up having to go back into commercial driving or something. Because bills are not going to wait for you. So I applied for a position at the ACLU of Arizona. They had a campaign for smart justice, and this campaign mission was to reduce prison population by 50% and, combat racial disparities that occur in the system. And I was like, office work. I don't want to do it. And at first I wasn't going to apply and end up applying. Had 2 good interviews.
Chapter 7. Chapter 8. New officer.
So
Chapter 2.
I applied in March 7th, 2018. I was hired as community partnership coordinator with the ACLU of Arizona. So this campaign has given me one great platform to really address these issues and not be penalized for advocating against officials or organization or politicians who really make poor decisions and think, their smart politics are not affecting people's lives. And it's not about the individual, it's about the issue. So when I talk about the representation that the Arizona Justice Project, how they represented me 10 years, I could never acknowledge the fact that I wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for them. So in 2014, I became a board member. the Arizona Justice Project, and they represent those till today who've been wrongfully convicted. They also look at manifest injustices that occur, and they're also looking at due process for parole. You know, and we're talking about after a person has completed or fulfilled their obligation, you know, there's still barriers and obstacles up that does not successfully allow them to transition. So as a board member, we still do a lot of work. I do some part-time consulting with defense attorneys. And a lot of it is mainly to eliminate stigmas that come from fear. You know, and those stigmas lead to stereotypes, and those stereotypes lead to profiling. And then people start being disenfranchised because they simply don't understand that this person wants to transition back into society. I'm working with Mountain Park to eliminate those stigmas inside the healthcare system, and just really making myself available, because it's a lot of work to be done here. You know, we have to change this culture of fear, because regardless how it looks, I'm still your neighbor. And no man or woman is an island to themselves. So moving forward, you know, I share my platform. I'm here. I'll be doing a lot of work. Should I talk about So I was just notified about an hour ago, hour and a half ago, that I am the newest board member at the Arizona Faith Network.
Oh, great.
So, you know, we look to, or I'm hoping we look to dig into and address a lot of the criminal legal issues that are going on, and really take these issues back from politicians, because it's a lot of red tapes just to do right and be a community. So I look forward to that.
Questions?
First of all, can we just show our appreciation? And as the president-elect, Khalil and I will both begin our terms with Arizona Faith Network in January. And as president, I'm thrilled and delighted because he knows. I just think he's amazing. What questions do you have for our friend this evening? Go ahead. Do you have one?
So what was the rationale? What were they trying to do, and what motivated them to set you up when the guy got acquitted? Was it about the prosecutor's record, or?
So I think, you know, the thing, and this is the culture, most people, when I say this, I have nothing against prosecutors, even though this occurred.
I do.
The reality of it is it's good prosecutors. They have a culture not to just seek convictions, but really uphold the law. And in this instance, or the culture in Arizona that I've experienced, it's about a win. You know, some of the prosecutors boast on having a 98% conviction rate. You know, some of the prosecutors, they stack the deck against a defendant to where they have to take a plea, you know, and they'll take one offense and break it into multiple counts, and each count carries its own offense. And it's just alarming to me that prosecutors have so much unchecked power. And you know, here we are, we're going into 2012. It's a new, you know, it's an election year for prosecutors. 2020, excuse me. And you're seeing prosecutors across the country, Larry Krasner in Philly, who changed the culture of his office. That's what we're dealing with. And I think at this point, You know, my prosecutor was about winning at any cost, even if I had to lie. So now, you know, it's on record. Him and the detective, they falsely testified. Yes.
Did anything happen to them as a result of that?
So Peasy was disbarred, but not from my case. What really brought more attention to my case was there was a triple homicide that kind of happened about the same time, and he was prosecuting both of our cases. And these guys went to death row. So there's always more attention on death row cases. And, you know, there was so much misconduct in that case that they actually, you know, he was disbarred. And then at that time, you know, we were bringing our allegations against him. So it just, you know, here you have two separate cases and we're saying this also happened here. And the sad thing about it, it took a federal judge to really, and I'm going to be blunt, to have the guts to really address it. Because a lot of judges within the state, they were just stamping it. Nothing occurred. Stamping it, nothing occurred.
Are there any laws against this, and can they do more than disbar them? Can they themselves?
So prosecutors have unchecked power and they have immunity. I like California, and most people say I hate California, but I mean California is really looking at that level of accountability because you can actually be charged with withholding evidence and leading into wrongful convictions. They've actually made it a felony. So California also did away the same law that I went to prison for. They also did away, they repealed their felony murder law, mainly because people were going to prison for not committing murders. And, you know, one of the narratives now with our county attorney here in Maricopa is the continual messaging that we have violent offenders in our prison. And when you peel that onion back, you will see that you don't even have to commit an act of violence to be considered a violent offender. You don't have to assault or attack anybody to be charged with aggravated assault. And we should really look at repealing our felony murder law also, because there are several people who were sitting in prison for murders that they didn't commit. So.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you a statement you made earlier that when you joined the Smart Justice Partnership, your intent, the intent of the partnership was to reduce the number of people in prison. I've heard things on the news just recently that there are movements afoot, and I'm not sure by what organizations, to reduce the penalties for minor infractions. In other words, there are people that are in prison for minor drugs, for possession of drugs. They're in prison for 25 to life for possession of drugs, not even for use or
Right.
Intent to sell. And I think those are the things one of the things you're talking about. But there are. I mean, this is part of the same effort. Right?
Yeah. So the campaign, it's actually the Smart Justice Campaign. It's a 50-state initiative campaign. It's really like I get attacked for bringing these issues from some individuals who don't, and I say, whoa, it's not an ACLU. Like the ACLU didn't come up with this. These are issues that's been in the community that the ACLU identified through other community partners, whether they're grassroots. And one of the things that the ACLU does have is a lot of experience, and they will litigate. even if it's against the government. They will litigate against themselves, you know, and I say that jokingly because in all fairness, when we look at how mass incarceration is going on, it has nothing to do with public safety. It's an industry. You know, we're talking about a $1.1 billion budget to our corrections. And people don't understand, like, if I say, hey, here's a blank check, but don't go over $1.1 billion, that means I'm not worried about that budget because I'm making so much more off of it. So I mean, when you look at what's tied to our beds is labor.
I've heard of other instances like yours where the policeman on the beat couldn't find a suspect, so they just went and arrested somebody.
It happens all the time. So the campaign, some of the initiatives, so we're looking at eliminating cash bail because it has nothing to do with that person returning to court. Simply, if you have the money, you can bail out. If you don't, you sit there. So what about the homeless guy that you arrested who you know don't have the money to bail out? So he's going to sit there till he sees a judge. And you already know, I mean, they're picking them up on trespassing and they get cycled through. Now they're getting a little bit better with addressing that. But then, you know, we're looking at eliminating cash bail. Okay. We're looking at prosecutorial reform, which is what some of the points that we just brought up. It's up to the people to change the culture in these offices because they say they represent the people. However, it don't seem like they represent the interests. Justice looks different depending on who's administering it. So we're looking at prosecutorial reform. We're looking at reentry because we have to reduce, you know, when Truth in Sentencing came in 1994, where the mandatory 85%, whether you're a first-time offender or whatever, everybody's doing the same amount of time in this state, 85%. So, you know, when you really break that down and evaluate it, what happened was the government said, hey, I'm going to incentivize you. I'm going to give you a check to lock people up longer. That's I want to say, Craig, that's just, I can't believe it. That's insane. I'm going to give you money to lock people up longer, even though their actions are the same. Same crime, same everything. So we're looking to do away with that. We're looking at parole reform. And then the other one was cash bail, sentencing. You know, so the mandatory sentencing scheme, you have to do away with it. You know, so our county attorneys, on one end, they say, hey, we want to address the opioid issue. But then secretly, they're meeting to try to get mandatory minimums implemented around fentanyl and all. And I mean, and all that played out bad because right now, and it's not it's not corrections' fault because they only get who comes to their doorstep. But I mean, you got people going to prison right now for a pack of rolling papers called drug paraphernalia, 1 or 2 joints. So that's why we keep our population up high. And when we say we want to reduce it by 50%, and people say that's aggressive, well, they're aggressively locking people up. And we need to have that same amount of energy to undo it.
We have a question from one of our people that's live streaming in, and the question reads, I'm working with a cousin who is serving life plus 90 years in Florida. Our lawyer is preparing his federal habeas corpus case and feels like we have a real chance. What advice do you have for my cousin on how to be patient as he waits to see what happens?
So the big part of my story that I didn't share is when I wanted to give up and I wasn't patient. So Amy, that's why I brought this card too. So Amy's a yogi. She does yoga, and she writes me and she says, hey, she's calm. She says, hey, maybe you should start doing yoga. And I'm like, in the men's prison, for real. And you know, I deeply trust and respect Amy. So I secretly went around, hey, what do you think about yoga? And we actually started yoga inside on the yard. So, you know, it was yoga, meditating, reading. And I mean, through these trials and tribulations, you have to have patience. You really have to slow your mind down and not let it race. Because the biggest part of doing time is when you have officers who think they're paid to punish you. So they come in and they start looking for things wrong to set you off. Not all of them, but some of them think, hey, I'm here to punish you. So it takes a lot of patience to deal with that. So I would say, you know, read, but the biggest thing is for the family, which I call the village, is to have that human contact. Never give up that artificial contact. Go down and visit. Because that energy right there, it beats anything.
Thank you. I'm curious, we have a couple of lawyers in the room. I'm just curious if you have either comments or questions. Go ahead.
Well, I think for me, looking at the correlation or the connection of the merit system and how prosecutors are promoted versus how on their conviction rates, because I know that was something that was happening in California, and like looking at that type of reform. And it just goes back to also the reentry. I'm really interested in that, but it's definitely a culture to do punitive wins.
Yep.
It's very competitive in that type of environment. I mean, you still have certain language used instead of calling someone undocumented is illegal alien. So when you have that type of conversation, that type of dialogue that happens, it disconnects that person from being human to being an object in a win, in a competitive win. And, you know, things going on with the cash bail system. I know from a domestic violence and sexual violence perspective, a lot of our survivors are awaiting sentences because, you know, they can't afford that. And even with our major funding, which was in the 1994 crime bill, was the Violence Against Women Act. And majority of those funding goes to prosecution, law enforcement, and that avenue, the criminal legal system, instead of services. So it's definitely a culture and a concept that not only starts within law enforcement and prosecution and prosecutorial office of the judiciary, but also into society. And so that's just my synopsis.
And Khalil, just for your information, we're honored to have her with AFN on our mission focus team. You'll be getting to know each other. Paul, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me is it's very interesting to see the cyclical nature of how criminal prosecutions and law enforcement goes over time. You know, for a time it'll be very harsh sentencing, and make sure that people serve their entire sentence and, you know, lock people up. I mean, and you know, on a local basis, I know in New York City a number of years ago was, you know, a broken window. There's a broken window. You get the person who broke that window, and you know, they like almost a zero tolerance policy. And then over time, that cycle changes, and it will be sentencing reform, providing more discretion to judges for sentencing as opposed to mandatory sentences. And then, you know, the wheel starts turning again. I think we're now turning on the downside to more, you know, strict law enforcement, more people in for lower levels of crime, with strict mandatory sentencing guidelines. So that's what I fear is we're kind of on a downturn now.
Thank you. Other questions, please?
Where does the governor stand in all this?
So and the governor has really, one of the bigger issues right now is reentry. So this reentry model that goes on, because he hasn't addressed anything on the front side. But on the back side, he says he believes in second chances. However, these second chances, to me, they represent an exploitive reentry, from housing to to laws that really kind of keep people from getting their own place, expungements, and getting people into solid careers. Because what happens now is jobs. They come out and they say, hey, I'm gonna get you a job. But that, to me, and what I've seen, that's exploitive labor. Because I'm gonna give you a job and I'm gonna say, okay, 2017, we just raised minimum wage to $10. So I've done some numbers, and according to the Economic Policy Institute, you have to make at least $19.58 an hour to be empowered in all areas in Maricopa County. So there's a difference between minimum wage, livable wage. So the biggest thing that, and I don't know this governor, but his issues that he's standing up, what good is a second chance if a person's not walking out of prison healthy? So he has the power right now to make changes to address the lawsuit that's been going on that the taxpayers are paying for. This lawsuit been going on because the culture for prison healthcare has been real bad since 1996, and I walked in. So now you have Horizon, who are intentionally not giving people adequate health care. So you bid low for the contract, and then you kind of cut corners. But when people start dying, our attorney general should be looking into it. How do you not have a large lawsuit and your attorney general does not even put an investigation into what's going on? Perryville and Lewis are in Maricopa County. Bill Montgomery has not put any investigation into Horizon. So the governor's sitting back silently, and he says, hey, I believe in second chances. You can't. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. And then Nancy.
Nancy maybe had her hand up before I did.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I would be interested in the racial component, both in your journey and in how you see the current situation.
As far as?
Well, was there a racial component in your story?
Well, I talk about when we say we're supposed to be judged by a jury of our peers. There was no African American, there was no people of color on my jury. Okay, one. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because that was another part. I mean, there's so many things that happened. Two of the jurors wrote a letter to the judge saying they didn't want to convict. I didn't find this letter till 8 years later. So at first, where I'm looking and I'm like, well, I got 14 white people. I got 12 and 2 alternates. And I said, okay, they're about to hang me. I was scared, and it happened. But then I didn't know that these women had wrote this letter to the judge. But when you look at that, and I'm on the ground, and there's an urgency to educate, especially in Arizona, because there's a big disconnect, and people don't understand the issues. And they go and they get on the jury, and at that point, it's really who can paint the best picture. So you're being asked as a juror to evaluate evidence in a situation or a case that you have no knowledge of a culture. You see what I mean? So along that journey, I see, we're dealing with, I think we're the 4th highest incarcerator of Latinos in the country, and we're the 6th highest incarcerator of African Americans in the country. So, you know, I have harder numbers, but this is all part of the workshops we intend on moving forward with, because, you know, I want to present facts and I want people to look at numbers and you know, let's study it. So you can be a better, you know, advocate or fighter, or, you know, we can get these changes on the ground, but it's going to take, you know, harder facts. So
Tell us about
Hold
the
it, please.
workshops.
Hold, please. Nancy, and then you're next.
There was an article in today's Arizona Republic that I found very disturbing about treatment of mentally ill people in the jails around our state. But many of you may already have heard about an effort, programs called Justice Reinvestment that have been around since the early 2000s. And since that time, more than 30 states have decreased their prison populations significantly or kept them from increasing, as Arizona's has increased. And there was a justice report written in 2009 in time for the 2010 session of the legislature, which recommended this process, which involves usually the governor putting together a comprehensive citizen and law enforcement and, you know, people from various walks of life, and looking at the entire system and its goals and, you know, what's going on within the system.
Do you have a question?
And Arizona, well, I guess my comment is that that report has never been brought into the public realm and or looked at by the legislature, and so I just want to agree that there are certain legislators and this Prosecuting Attorneys Association which are very resistant to reform in Arizona, and so it's really going to take citizen efforts.
Well, we're very lucky, though, with this election. We've got some real scrappers that have been elected. Representative-elect Jen Lundgren is one of them. And so we've got some people in there now, including at the federal level, for that matter, with this election. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
The workshops you mentioned.
Yes, so the workshops, we just actually had a policy summit where we looked at two bills. One of the bills was the 85% or truth in sentencing. So, you know, we were able to get people in the room, get feedback, especially those directly impacted. And when I say those directly impacted, I work with a lot of formerly incarcerated individuals. Some of them done 44 years, some of them done 27. And when they're released, where most people run from them, I run to them. With the understanding that they say those closest to the problem will have the solutions. So, you know, we just had that policy summit December 1st. The second bill was actually expungements. We had a discussion briefly before everybody came in, where you have people who are incarcerated, putting their lives on the line, fighting these forest fires every year. Don't you think at least we can start them as being candidates for expungements of their record?
Yeah.
For real. So, you know, and
So this is data gathering, not dispersion of the data you've already gathered.
the who?
Not dispersion of the data you've already gathered.
Well,
It wouldn't educate us. You're gathering the data.
No. So these workshops are specifically geared. So if there's a policy coming up, most people say, hey, okay, they read the language of that policy, but they don't understand how that policy or hurt or help individuals when it's implemented. So the workshops, and that's where I say a lot of people may understand procedure, but not issue. So we try to have workshops to give a different perspective on a bill. And, you know, so one of the workshops we're building out for next month is, how many people in here understand DOC policy?
What?
DOC policy.
You read it, but we don't understand.
Some of us.
Department of Corrections.
Where do you find those policies?
So those policies are online. You can read them. But the biggest thing about that is one, read the policy, and then you'll know how they don't follow their own policy. So, now you can see the difference. And when I advocate for people, I understand policy very well. I understand that there's no due process with their disciplinary system. So, judge, jury, executioner. So what's the importance of that? Well, I just was mentoring a young lady, and then there's another young lady who was out looking for an apartment a few months ago. And lo and behold, the disciplinary record is showing on their credit report as felonies. So the tickets that they're obtaining in prison, it's showing on their credit report as a new felony. So yeah. So those are the things that we hold those workshops. And
Just to let you know, I can help you with that, so.
And then if you're interested, I brought commitment cards. Also, I'm here inside of the Faith Network, but the commitment cards are a simple ask for people to invest in each other and not prisons. So, if you want to get into those workshops, it's not going to be hard, but when we have them, please show up.
Other questions?
For AACLU Smart Justice, I know you are aggressively attacking legislative efforts and everything like that. Have you all been in talks and communication with like the business community, the housing community, those things, and what are those efforts? Because once someone is, like you specified and eloquently explained, prior, that once someone is out, they can't find housing, or they may not qualify for, a student loan to further their education, or they may not be able to get a job, those type of things. So what kind of efforts around that?
So June 18th of this year, we had our first ever village meeting. And this village meeting, I call it a village because most people use the term coalitions. Okay, those are cool. But they sound official based. So village was more of a heartbeat to where we're looking at resolving issues and assisting people versus then dealing with politics. So in this village meeting, I invited people from healthcare, people from transportation, employment, education, and that healthcare was health and mental health. So, we all came together, and we were trying to coordinate services. If I got somebody, let's share resources. Let's make sure when they're released, that part of the 19,000 people that's released every year, recidivism is 21% in that first year. So I believe that people are not getting connected with the services. And then it's not just giving them a piece of paper and instructing them, hey, go over here, but actually walking them through, showing them. So we had that village meeting. There's another one coming up. We try to have them quarterly. And then also June 21st, I'm partnered up with Public Defender's Office to have a reentry conference. So that's another place, and I'll send it out as we get closer. But the reentry conference is really to coordinate that, because even if we do get these bills passed and they release people, they're going to have somewhere to go. But everybody at this table is part of the village if you choose to participate.
Thank you all for coming. I do want to give just a couple minutes for you to talk about the book, please.
So, here you go. She thought she was going to be quiet. So my wife decided to take my story, and she wrote a fictional book. But she can explain the book.
Okay, the part of his story, he worked so hard, but the part of his story is his story of re-entry. He's very passionate about that, and everything else is basically fictional, part of my mind. I'm a registered nurse, and I love forensics. And so with that in mind, I kind of geared the book towards this is about community. And it's a fictitious community building where there's some cultural influence that cause people to put themselves in a position where they are victims. And basically it talks about a toxic environment and overcoming a toxic environment. And I just integrated parts of what Khalil has gone through and his dedication to reentry within the pages of this book. I edited myself because I was getting ready to start my PhD program. So there's a few little errors in here.
It's just fine. I've read it. It's great. Please, we have a few copies tonight, so please, if you can purchase.
And it's 20. And so also what I wanted to do was I created a company. It's called Our World, O-U-R, Our World Universal. And it's dedicated to address social issues. It's a for-profit mainly because I didn't want to get tied up in grants. I wanted to take proceeds and be able to funnel those back into programs at will. So I created a social justice logo. And I will start back reprinting these next month. Okay. So it's A and a Z, if you can see it. So it's just an A and a Z, and it has the Arizona flag collaged on it, and there's a variety of colors.
Okay, yeah, I see it now. It took me a minute, Khalil.
I know, that's
the idea.
so, moving forward, I will open these up for people to, you can use the logo, color customize it, and then you can put your organization on the neck to just show that you're part of the village.
Oh.
So this is the ASU color scheme. I hope you still can't see it, huh?
No, I got you.
So there's an A.
They're Tucson people, so I don't know. It was the ASU thing that threw them, I think.
But see, that makes it better because I wasn't going to leave Tucson out. We have the Patriot color scheme. But
yeah, I see it.
so, with that in mind, it's just moving forward. I never want to be put in a position to where somebody needs help and then somebody says, hey, you know what? We don't have the money for it. More money is put out for research right now than actually resolving the issue. So, that's my passion.
Can we show our appreciation, please? Obviously, Khalil can come to your group or place as well. And so, please take a moment tonight to say hi. And in the meantime, on behalf of the Desert Southwest Conference, thank you all. Safe journey tonight. Oh, sorry.
Everybody take 3 breaths. Big breaths, real quick. I know everybody's tired. I'm going to read a scripture and I'm going to flip it. That's what I'm going to try to do. This is Psalms 146, verses 7 and 8. He upholds the cause of the oppressed and gives food to the hungry. The Lord sets prisoners free. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. But what if the obvious is not what this is telling us? Maybe he's talking to us. Sometimes, and we saw this in our church, we take on a challenge we're very uncomfortable with. I'm sorry. Ladies in our church dealing with criminals, that was not a comfortable move when we first started Matthew 25. How many pen pals now, Bill?
93, I believe.
93. Direct communication and building relationships, things like that. So that's setting us free to take a chance. Maybe that's what he was talking about here. Blind? If we don't participate in these groups and learn and educate ourselves, we're blind to the real problem. So maybe that scripture is telling us, you know, the Lord can cure the blind. We got a lot of things that we could sign up to do. Please take that subscription thing that we had on the very front to get that newsletter, and we'll put the things you could do. But for sure, give Khalil one of these if you want to stay up to date with what he's doing. Okay? It's all about people.